Hello guys, my name is Rowan Smith and I want to welcome you to the Training for Mountaineering podcast. Now this podcast is entirely dedicated to helping you train, prepare and conquer your upcoming mountaineering adventure. Once a week I'm going to be sharing with you in-depth and evidence-backed information around improving your physical performance on the mountain, reducing your likelihood of pain and injury, nutrition for mountaineers, and even a bit of mental strength development, so you can be empowered in your training to give yourself the very best chance of a safe, enjoyable, and successful mountaineering adventure. So now that you know what you're in for, let's get into today's episode. Hello guys. Today's episode we're doing a comparison piece between Summit Strength, which this Training for Mountaineering podcast is hosted by, and Uphill Athlete. Now the reason why I want to do this episode today is over the last few weeks I've had quite a number of conversations with mountaineers who've been listening to this podcast or following my weekly newsletter. And they've been looking for a little bit of help with their preparations, but they've been tossing up between working through with myself through one of my programs or working with Uphill Athlete, either following along with one of their books or buying one of their training programs. And they're wanting to know, what the difference is and sort of what would suit them best. So I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to do a dedicated episode today because the guys at Uphill Athlete are absolutely fantastic at what they do. They're probably the world leaders in what they do and they've got a great history behind them. But there are multiple ways of going about your preparation for mountaineering, and the way I do it is quite different. Some people will prefer the Uphill Athlete methods, some people prefer the Summit Strength methods. So my intention today is just to give you a bit of an insight into where we differ, what our approaches are, how our approaches are a little bit different, so you can sort of see, what information might suit you best. Now, if you haven't heard of Uphill Athlete before, and you're a mountaineer, and you're interested in training, you've probably been living under a rock. But for the few people who haven't heard of them before, they are, as I said before, probably the world leaders in physical preparation for mountaineering and alpinism. Now, they literally wrote the book on modern day training for the mountain athlete, a fantastic book called The Training for New Alpinism. And they've, over the last 6-7 years, or however many years since that book, they've really made a big impact in the community of mountaineering in regards to structured training. Now, bringing sports science, bringing the very, very structured approach, introducing strength training, and doing a whole bunch of fantastic things for the community. And they've really become a name that's very, very well known in the mountaineering community. And pretty much anyone who's preparing for a big adventure will probably have come across their stuff in one way or another. However, when I dove into their stuff and when I was really, really digging into the initial research around preparing for mountaineering adventures, there was a lot of stuff I liked and there was a lot of stuff that I didn't like. Now, not because I didn't think it was good and not because I didn't think it wouldn't work, because it obviously does because I have so many success stories around them, but purely for the fact for my preferences, for my coaching, and also the people that I often deal with. I just knew it wasn't really going to work for many people out there. And personally for me, I wouldn't enjoy coaching in the way that they coach. So the way that I've gone with Summit Strength in leading up to my preparation and developing my training systems for mountaineering differs in quite a few different ways. So as I said, we're going to be breaking that down today. Now, probably the biggest thing that differs between the Summit Strength approach and the Uphill Athlete approach is the pre-made programs versus coaching. Now, Uphill Athlete is a big company and they have a lot of people that they're working with. And probably the majority of the stuff they sell to most mountaineers out there are pre-made coaching programs in which a template is made up. You buy it for $60 or $70 and it gives you a solid training plan for 16, 24 weeks or whatever it may be. Now, this obviously works for some people and a lot of people have had success from it, but I'm not a big fan of that approach. Now, all the stuff that I sell through Summit Strength is all personalized coaching and it's very, very individualized. Now, what I've found in the past is there's a certain percentage of people who can succeed on a pre-made program, and that generally looks at someone who has a very, very big history of training experience behind them. They are pretty knowledgeable in what they're doing and they're pretty well aware of how their body works. However, the most people out there who are training for these adventures, particularly people who haven't been doing it for the last decade, they don't have this awareness. And they just aren't experienced enough to be able to work off a pre-made program and to get the most success. Now, always people come into issues during training processes, particularly during long-term training processes of, work will get busy, they'll get sick, the family will get busy, they'll get demotivated, weather will turn bad, or whatever it may be. And there's always roadblocks and speed bumps along the process. And I'm a massive advocate of having the personal coaching touch, in which you can troubleshoot issues, you can alter things as you go. And while it might not be the perfect training program and perfect training situation, it's going to be the perfect training program for you in that particular moment of time. Now, there'll be periods where I've worked with people previously where everything's going along all well and good, and all of a sudden their workload doubles, and they can barely fit in 30 minutes of training a day. Now, on a pre-made program, that's just a road to ruin. It's never going to work. You're going to feel down, you're going to drop sessions, you're going to lose your training momentum. But I'm a big advocate of keeping things flexible in that situation. And if you do have the personal touch and a personal coach to help you there, that is something I'm a big fan of. So probably the biggest difference between uphill athlete and summit strength is really that difference between pre-made programming and personal coaching. Now, not to say uphill athlete doesn't do personal coaching, which they do offer, but it's definitely not the main thing that they sell. Another big difference point when it comes to the two approaches is the approach of strength training itself. Now, listening to this podcast, you probably heard that I'm a massive fan of strength training. And when it comes to the endurance world in general, now strength training is generally regarded as an add-on to a standard endurance program. It's sort of as a suggested thing you can do to enhance what you're currently doing, or maybe a sub-activity. But what Uphill Athlete has really done well is bringing strength training and introducing it to mountaineers as a core part of the program, and really making sure it's valued almost as much as traditional endurance training. However, when it comes down to it, while they've done an amazing job introducing it, I don't think they take it quite far enough. And I think there's so many benefits from strength training and so many benefits from structured strength training which you can get. And I just think the approach done with Uphill Athlete is a little bit simplistic. Yes, it works, but again, it probably misses out on quite a few of the more detailed and more specific benefits that strength training can offer. And again, if you're doing it by yourself and you're working off a pre-made program, it probably is beneficial to have a really simple approach that doesn't need a huge amount of variation. But with Summit Strength, we try to get a little bit more, dive into it a little bit more. Not to say we're doing crazy complicated exercises, but our approach is a little bit deeper, a little bit more thought out, and it has a little bit extra inclusions in regards to accessory exercises and injury prevention and long-term periodization and a bunch of other things. So with the Summit Strength training, it generally does get a little bit deeper. So if you think, have you looked at Uphill Athlete strength training and you think it might be a bit too simplistic, or it might not cater for your particular preferences, you might consider looking at the Summit Strength approach. Another big difference between the two approaches is the numbers. So when it comes down to Uphill Athlete, they love their training working out their training volumes. They love their heart rate zones. They love their heart rate tracking. They love their testing, and just really love numbers and tracking it. And using the training app which they use through Training Peaks, its biggest benefit is it can really get into the metrics and the numbers, and it can be very beneficial for people who enjoy doing that. Now, for me, I just do not like numbers, and I do not like diving deep into stuff like that. It bores me, in all honesty. I can do it, but it's not something that I enjoy. So with Summit Strength, the approach that I take is really trying to make things as simple as possible. You don't have to be tracking a dozen different metrics every week. You don't have to be working out complicated numbers around training volumes and transition periods and all of that. You don't have to be doing tests to figure out your heart rate zones. There are much simpler ways of going about it, which are pretty much just as effective, and that's what we sort of lean towards with Summit Strength. Now, again, not to say either approach is any better than the other, but I know a lot of people will look at the numbered approach and go a little bit cross-eyed, and I'm the same, and I just do not enjoy it. So if you don't like tracking all this numbers, if you don't obsess over spreadsheets and you don't obsess over your heart rate monitor, the Summit Strength approach might be for you. However, if you are in that position where you really do love your numbers, you might be looking a bit more on the Uphill Athlete side of things. Another thing that differs is time efficiency. Now, the uphill athlete approach is very, very time heavy. It's really structured around long periods of low intensity exercise where you're doing multiple, like lots and lots of hours every single week, which builds and builds and builds. And yes, it does work. And yes, a certain amount of long duration exercise is extremely necessary for mountaineering objectives. But for me, I don't think it's very practical for many people out there. If you're coming from an endurance background and you're perfectly happy to do multiple sessions of multiple hours a week, and that's just part of your life, absolutely go with uphill athlete. But if you work a busy job, if you're not coming from an endurance background, if you want to make things a bit more time efficient into your week, that's what we try to do at Summit Strength. I know people really do struggle to fit in long periods of exercise into their week. I know people have young families. I know people have busy lives. I know people get bored just doing hours and hours and hours of long duration, low intensity exercise. In fact, I've talked to one of an Australian mountaineer who's very, very successful, been in the game for quite a while. They were working with me over last year leading into a big climb in Nepal, and they said, look, I've previously bought a training program, but I dropped out of it in 3 weeks because I just got bored. And, it might have worked, but I just couldn't stick with it because I just wanted to shoot myself, was literally what they said. And that's not something I ever want my athletes and my mountaineers to get to. So we do try to make things a bit more interesting. We do try to make things a little bit more time efficient. The next thing is injury prevention. Now, I'm a massive advocate of injury prevention being the number one thing in any training program. And when I say that, I mean avoiding things that can potentially cause unnecessary risk of injury, as well as bulletproofing the body from harm. Now, that's something I put a massive emphasis into my training programs through strength training, through load management, through variation, and through a few other factors which I really put big emphasis into. Now, the uphill athlete, yes, there is an element of injury prevention through the strength training, and yes, there is a lot of load management going on, but I think it doesn't really go incredibly deep. And that's probably just a consequence of the pre-made programs again, because it cannot be tailored to people's particular needs so much in that situation. So I think that's another big differentiating factor between the two approaches. If you are struggling with foot pain, knee pain, shin pain, back pain, shoulder pain, you might lean towards more the Summit Strength approach, in my particular opinion. However, if you've got no issues at all and you're perfectly happy to go out and do massive training weeks and you never have an issue, you might enjoy the uphill athlete approach a little bit more. And then comes down to probably the final thing that I want to talk about today is if you are doing technical climbing. So if you are trying to prepare for something that has a lot of climbing in it and you're wanting to really, really up your fitness game, that's generally not something that the Summit Strength programs cover in huge depth. Now, we do basic climbing conditioning and basic climbing strength and fitness, and it definitely does help for people who don't need a huge amount of climbing in their trips, but we're mainly focused on non-technical climbing. Now, if you are doing a trip which has a lot of technical stuff in it, a lot of time on the tools, a lot of time on the walls, or whatever it may be, you might lean a bit more towards the uphill athlete approach, purely because that's where their expertise lie, in that alpinism and in all of that little bit more technical side of things. Not to say that you can't get some benefits out of the simple approach, but if you really want to dive into that, you might lean towards uphill athlete. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight today into the difference in between the two training approaches. As I say, there's nothing wrong with either approach. They both can work. It really just depends on what fits into your life and your preferences a little bit better. And hopefully by the end of this podcast, if you have been tossing up training ideas from the two sources and you are wondering, hey, if I needed to reach out to get a little bit extra help, where would I land? You sort of know which camp you might reach out to be in. Whether that's uphill athlete, whether that's Summit Strength, it's entirely up to you. I'm a big advocate of you finding the best training approach for you, but hopefully you have a better idea now. Now, if you wanted any extra information around anything I've talked about today, wanted to expand on anything which I haven't explained so well, or you're just curious about any of the things I mentioned, please do feel to reach out to me anytime. Swing me an email at rowan@summitstrength.com.au or shoot me a friend request on Facebook. Always happy to have a chat about these things. And if you have enjoyed this episode today, I would absolutely love if you could share it with another mountaineer who might be interested in their training and they can get a little bit of information information that I've been imparting over these episodes. So thank you so much for listening today, guys, and we'll talk to you soon.